on every occasion that has counted. Nick Xenophon has lined up with the member for Warringah going back to 2009 to trash sensible climate change and energy policy. Back in 2009, he describes Labor's emissions trading scheme, which we were negotiating with the Liberal Party at the time, as a dog. He said a dog that should be put down. On the first day of Tony Abbott's, the member for Warringah's, leadership after defenestrating the member for Wentworth, Nick Xenophon delivered Tony Abbott the most extraordinary tactical victory by voting down the emissions trading scheme in the other place and setting that platform for a decade of vandalism and wrecking on sensible climate change and energy policy. And more than any other, that vote, that level of support that Nick Xenophon gave to the member for Warringah that day sowed the seeds for today's energy crisis and the challenges we have in good climate change and energy policy. And in 2011, again, Nick Xenophon backed the member for Warringah in voting against the Labor government, the Gillard government's Clean Energy Futures package, a package negotiated with sensible crossbenchers like Tony Windsor and Rob Oakeshott. But again, Nick Xenophon lined up with the extreme right of those opposite in again trashing sensible climate change and energy policy. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, Mr Deputy Speaker, Nick Xenophon then loyally voted again with the member for Warringah to repeal the Clean Energy package, to dismantle entirely the carbon price mechanism after Tony Abbott became Prime Minister, making Australia the first the member for Warringah, the Prime Minister, making Australia the first nation in the world to entirely dismantle climate change framework, a climate change framework. And he did so, the member for Warringah did so with Nick Xenophon's support. And 6 months later, again unsurprisingly, Nick Xenophon voted with the member for Warringah to install the direct action policy, a policy that had been ridiculed for 5 years by expert after expert. And 3.5 years later, what do we see? Carbon pollution levels have continued to rise. Billions of dollars of taxpayers' funds have been handed over by those opposite to businesses with no impact on the government's carbon footprint whatsoever. And in the review that Nick Xenophon negotiated with the member for Warringah as his price for supporting direct action into legislation, the review that was delivered in December recommends making it even easier for large polluters to increase their carbon pollution levels, not harder. And on renewable energy, Mr Deputy Speaker, Nick Xenophon has again been a strong supporter of some of the most extreme, discredited anti-renewables rubbish seen in this country. In 2012, famously, Deputy Speaker, Nick Xenophon said about wind power, people are being driven out of their homes. How can you have people turned into wind turbine refugees because the noise, the infrasound, that low-frequency noise that actually affects brain activity is ruining their lives, A claim utterly debunked by the National Health and Medical Research Council and all of their equivalent agencies across the world. And when the government, under the member for Warringah's Prime Ministership, launched their attacks on the renewable energy target in 2014, again Nick Xenophon stood shoulder to shoulder right beside them. He told a conference that year, "I don't like wind," he said, "and I think that's an issue for a lot of other coalition MPs." And he famously arranged to attend on the same day a rally in favour of the renewable energy target and a rally against the renewable energy target. Classic Nick Xenophon walking both sides of the road. You often hear over the course of this campaign also Nick Xenophon talk a lot about affordability. But again, we saw the true colour of Nick Xenophon's commitment on this last year when he waved through $24 billion of company tax cuts supported by those on the other side. And when he had the government over a barrel and said he'd deliver something on affordability, do you think he got the government to drop the energy supplement cut, which will mean $365 per year every year for aged pensioners and disability support pensioners? Well, no, he gave in for one-off payment of $75. I'd love to negotiate with this guy when he's in a position of strength. Nick Xenophon has made a career out of presenting himself as an honest broker, Mr Deputy Speaker. If you don't look at what he says, though, you've got to look at what he does and how he votes. And on climate change policy, on every single occasion when it counted, Nick Xenophon voted with the member for Warringah. to wreck sensible climate change policy and to usher in reckless direct action nonsense. On renewable energy, he has parroted some of the silliest, most discredited rubbish about renewable energy you will hear in this building or even outside it. And he gave moral support to Tony Abbott, the member for Warringah's constant attacks against renewables. If you care about action on climate change and energy transition, don't vote for Nick Xenophon.